The Folklife Center is really concerned with the concept of documenting, presenting, and preserving the diverse cultures of Vermont. And sort of at the heart of that concept is this idea of making people visible to one another, which sort of comes alive in George's photographs that you see on the walls and is going to be hopefully alive tonight in this conversation. So I just wanted to share that piece with you and thank you all for coming and turn it over to George and our panelists. Thank you.
I have just a few very brief remarks.
You need to.
Do I need to? Okay.
You got to speak up.
Have to speak up. Okay. A few very brief remarks. First, thank you to Ned and the Folklife Center for all the work they put into this exhibit and arranging the panel discussion. Thank you to Dick Thodel over here from Middlebury Community Television. He's taping the discussion. It'll be available on MCTV, and then you can download it from their site, use it in whatever fashion you'd like. And there will also be a shorter version, an edited version that will be available for you people to download. So thank you, Ned and Dick. Finally, thank you to the panelists here. For those in the audience involved in the working landscape, the panelists need little or no introduction. If there's a study, a conference, or a report to the legislature, look for their involvement. It will be there. I'll leave several reports up front here. You can look at them afterwards if you like. These are reports that many of the people here left their fingerprints on. And so the panelists tonight are, on the left is Paul Costello, who's going to be the moderator. Paul is the executive director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development. He's also a convener of many conferences and summits on the Vermont working landscape. Next to him is Tom Yager. Can I refer to you as the Dean of Foresters? 40 plus years.
I don't know if that's a good word.
Okay. But Tom has been a forester for A. Johnson, the big mill in Bristol, for 40 plus years. You know, he's seen generations of forest reports and is really a very knowledgeable person from the, what is it like to feed the beast? And the beast is the sawmill that requires feeding every day. Next to him is David Brynn. David was the county forester in Addison for many years. He then founded Vermont Family Forests and continues to direct it. He's a very innovative and thoughtful person when it comes to thinking about the forest. And next to him is Jamey Fidel. He's the general counsel and director of the Forest and Wildlife Program at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. He is also convener of groups, the group being the Vermont Forest Roundtable, which meets quarterly and brings together people from across the spectrum of interest in the forest. And finally, Michael Snyder. He was the forester for Chittenden County for many years, and for the last several years he's been the commissioner of the Vermont Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation. The format will be each panelist will speak for about 5 minutes on the theme of the discussion, which is Vermont's working forests, challenges and opportunities. The moderator will then open up the floor for comments, discussion among the panelists. We look forward to an engaging and informative discussion. Thank you all for coming.
Let's have a round of applause. You look at these pictures and you see hard work. You see some of the grittiness of an industry that's out in the woods, it's in the mud, it's working with raw material. You see the beauty of those woods. You see the machines. George has got a great eye for this stuff, and capturing it is really important. It's important to our history. It's also important as a celebration of the hard work that people put in. The Council on Rural Development, we've been really interested in forest policy for about 16 years. You look at the history of the state of Vermont, and you recognize that the first economy was the forest products economy. That the first people here, natives, were living in the forest, and they were living on the land. And the next generation, the white folks that first came in, they cleared land and they made a living on these parcels. They made potash. The land that we have today is the result of a succession, a series of economies, a series of families, of working people putting their backs to the plow to create and sustain themselves at the same time to steward the land. And we're incredibly lucky here in Vermont that they've done such a great job, and we need to be terrifically grateful for them. We love our farmers. We gotta love the forest products industry and the people who put their back to sustain the value of that forest. When you think about the land and you think about the economy, you have to recognize that when you look out of that pretty view, it's not an accident and it's not a wilderness. This is not a wilderness area. It's an area that has been tended. It's been stewarded by generations. And every generation, the family, is making economic decisions. Are we going to be able to make a living? Are we going to be able to feed our kids? Are we going to be able to put our kids to college if they want to go? Managing the land in balance between the economy and all the other values that it provides to us in terms of recreation, beauty, clean water, clean air, is on the back of those working folks. We don't recognize it enough, and we don't thank them enough. So one of the great things about what George has done here is he's pointing to it. And he's not making it all pretty and all just like something that it's not, but he's showing it in a way that shows the thoughtfulness behind it, the technology behind it, and the hard work behind it in a way that I think is going to help a lot of people appreciate it who look at a log landing and they worry about the mud instead of recognizing that if that forest doesn't have an economy that sustains it, it's going to be developed for another purpose. There's not going to be a sustaining value in that keeps it and holds it for the future, that gives it the background for stewardship. So it's crucially important. At the Vermont Council on Rural Development, we ran the Council on the Future of Vermont, which was the largest scale analysis of public values that's ever been done in the state of Vermont, we believe. We interviewed thousands of people. We went to talk to people at AIV, one of the lead business groups, and GBIC, Greater Burlington Industrial Corporation. We went and talked to kids in jail. And we talked to people in mobile home parks all across the state. We interviewed thousands of people. We polled others. And we asked them, what do we stand for? As Vermonters, are we still a people? Do we still have common values, things that unite us and that we stand by when we think of the future? And we found people talking about community and talking about the problems of affordability in living here and the challenge of keeping the next generation here. And we asked people what they valued most about this place. And we heard over and over again people saying, I love Vermont because of the mix of farm and field. I love Vermont because I can walk out my back door and participate in nature. I love Vermont because we've protected the environment and we have a strong working environment, or working landscape. We took those kind of anecdotal ideas and we polled people. We wanted to get scientific about it. What do we stand for? How do we really evaluate that? And when we polled people on statements around affordability, around our love for community, around the other Vermont virtues that we all celebrate all the time, the number one ranked value was, I value the working landscape and its heritage. And that's our brand. That's what's essential to us. Together as a people, we love the land. We're proud of what we've accomplished. We're looking at the next phase of how we keep the land sustainable. And so having George pull these things together, it's like a mark of where we are today. It's a celebration. And let's recognize that, and again, thank you, and recognize that the cool thing about the forest products industry, before I close up, is just that it's everywhere. When you look at job creation in the state of Vermont since 2008, there's been almost a flat line. When you look at Chittenden County job creation, you see a steady line upward. When you look at the rest of Vermont, you see a deep dip, and we're not back up yet to 2008. Legislators look at it, like Dave Potter here, and they recognize that we need to renew the rural economic foundations if we're going to be successful as a state and as a people. And when you look at that foundation, the rural economy is founded in the land. It's the renewal of agriculture and the renewal of forest products. I'm really proud to be here with this panel, with the commissioner, but also with a number of you I suspect are connected to the forest products industry, because we're in a great endeavor here. And it's an endeavor to renew the foundations of what has been classic to the character of Vermont, add value to it, like Michael does with his toys and other Vermont products. Add value to it. Let's not just sell the log for the lowest common denominator. Let's create. Let's get the best value out of every log. Let's bring more money into rural communities by being innovators and creators in all the different ways that we can celebrate this beautiful product of Vermont wood. So again, I'm honored and pleased to be here with this panel. And we'll start now by going on to people who know a little bit about the forest products industry more than I do. I'm always the guy who facilitates and is the most ignorant person in the room. So I'm pleased to introduce Tom Yager. And Tom, we'd love to hear about what A. Johnson's doing and your thoughts about today and the future.
Well, that's a very broad topic.
Yeah, you might want to stand up.
Can't hear you back here.
It's a very broad topic and kind of difficult. It's more like a diamond because there's so many facets to it that it's hard to approach it and really get a view of it, because every time you go look at a face, the light tends to warp a little bit. The biggest confrontation is the confrontation between social change in Vermont and the working landscape and the rural values, because most of the rural values that people who worked on the land have disappear with the urbanization of the area. And urbanization, because we live between so many big metropolitan areas, and people are moving farther and farther into the rural areas, but bringing the urban values there, it tends to be a loss of the rural values. People lose the historical perspective of looking at the land and understanding how the land got to be what it was. They look at the forest and they think, oh, we need to preserve the forest. Well, you can't preserve a forest. The forest is dynamic. It's always changing. It has to grow. It has to renew itself. So you can't really, and then it shrinks the time period down. They just want to, they want to think about it. It's fine. They're all for working forest, but someplace else. But the trouble is, there's always somebody someplace else who thinks the same thing. So in the end, everything gets tied up. And we went through a long period of time here of about 15 years when the National Forest was totally incapacitated from selling any timber. All because of lawsuits brought by people who wanted to preserve the forest and wanted it just as their viewpoint is, and lost the value of the working forest. That's beginning to change. We're seeing that very slowly, but the reason that crisis in confrontation is so important is because the whole industry it's a supply and demand issue. You have to have a supply of timber. That's where the thing starts. That provides the jobs. If the supply is too short, then the values have to go up because there's a lot of demand. It pushes the prices high. There's no profit margin. Companies can't grow if there's no profit margin, and there tend to be fewer jobs, and things just kind of dry up. So that's the big crisis because of the values and running into supplying the mills and all the mills around us and providing the values that everybody wants to see, because the public sector has so many constituencies that want to see certain things out of the forest. And one of those that is not very strong is cutting the forest down and turning it into lumber or paper or wood pellets or anything else. It's they want to enjoy it for recreation, and indeed they can, but they have to recognize that the dynamics of it, the renewal of the forest is necessary. I guess that's about all I can start with.
And we'll have plenty of time for discussion. So, David Brynn from Vermont Family Forests.
Sure. Well, thank you. I also want to thank George for these incredible photographs. What a thing. What a setting. And that he chose loggers is also a wonderful thing, because loggers are kind of are sort of a forgotten group out there, and their skills are not particularly well appreciated. And so I really feel good to be sitting among these photographs and with these people, and many of you are loggers that I know and value adders that I know. I think we really should celebrate, and each of us have already talked about that. We live in an amazing place. We live actually in paradise. If you compare the way we are with what a lot of people face around the world, we live in paradise. Our problems are relatively small. And though challenges remain, we still have a forest that has the capacity for self-renewal. And it's a forest that wants to grow and does grow, and it grows remarkably well. I wanted to talk a little bit about our changing relationships with the forest, because they've always been changing. The Western Abenakis were here for 10,500 years, and they viewed the forest as sacred. They viewed it as home. They were here before the Champlain Sea, and they were here after the Champlain Sea, so they saw change. But then in 1760 to 1850, there was a whole other era, which was really enclosure and settlement era, brought on by Governor Benning Wentworth, of all people. And it was forests as resources to be exploited, use and migrate. That was the legacy. There was no forestry for that 100 years. And then in the 1850s, brought on by George Perkins Marsh and others, we contemplated a different relationship with the forest, which was the conservative logging era. Those were Gifford Pinchot's words. Forests as resources to be managed. Practical forestry. Timber production was the focus. Sustained yield. The next era was kind of a land ethic era that was brought on by Aldo Leopold, but it was also brought on by a Russian by name of Peter Ouspensky, who in 1924 wrote a book called Tertium Organum, which was the notion that forest ecosystems are living entities. This really impacted Aldo Leopold in a big way. So he was the one who advocated for forests as living ecosystems to be conserved. Forest health, sure, then sustained yield. He said health, beauty, harmony, and productivity. And so now we're entering an era which is really going to be defined by climate change, I believe. Some say we're switching from the Cenozoic and hoping that we're getting into the Ecozoic. But it's forests as changing, resilient forest ecosystems in a changing climate. This is a big deal. And it requires a different forestry. It just does. I'm going to call it holistic forestry. And I think it's forestry that is going to be defined and informed by the best Western science that we have. But it's also going to be defined and informed by the best Eastern science as well. Holistic forestry. I'm going to describe the model to you very quickly. It's an intersection of layers, and one of the 7 layers I'd really like to point out are things that are pointed out in the Montreal process. Soil and water, biological diversity, carbon, forest vitality, forest productivity, social and economic values, recreation, traditional economic values, spirituality, and then underlined by policies, trusts, easements, taxations, fees, that kind of stuff. Those are those layers. Slicing through those layers is another set. And this is from a mindset that forests exist as tame, highly managed, all the way over to wild forest, much like the Battelle, 2,000 acres, has just recently been conserved up in Ripton. It's the triad. These are parts, I believe, of a healthy working forest. And then on the very top, there's another slice, 3 more slices. And these go back to Aristotle, way back to Aristotle, who recognized there were at least 3 different interests, 3 different types of things. Re publica, the public things, the private things, and the commonly held things. These are all the things that make a working forest a working forest. And so, as we move forward, we have the best motto of the entire United States: freedom and unity. Talk about it. Talk about an Eastern philosophy, right there. Freedom and unity. So, on the freedom part, I'd like to submit that most of the soil and most of the vegetation in the state of Vermont is owned by what we used to call NIFs, non-industrial private forest lands. We now call them family forest owners. They own that whole list of products. And I'm going to submit that to deal with them, we need more guidelines and we're going to need fewer standards. We're going to need more education and less regulation. But then on the other side, the unity piece is about the commons. It's those things that we as a people hold together. We all hold them. We hold the water, we hold the critters, and we hold the changing climate. I'm going to focus on water because I personally think it's one of the premier forest products. Clean water, and nowadays with these gully washing rainstorms that we're getting, we need to be thinking about a forestry that attenuates peak flows by slowing, spreading, and sinking these flows. We really ought to be thinking more about catchments and less about watersheds. We probably are going to need to forward more and skid less. And maybe we should be thinking about optimal conservation practices. Practices that reduce the amount of roads, flatten the amount of roads, narrow the roads, and understand the need within a working forest to have ecological reserves, such as hydrologic reserves. I think if we do this, we'll be seeing also, we've got to wake up to the fact that it took 250 years to get to where we are. We have this changing climate. It's not going to turn around immediately. I think we would need incremental compliance. We would need citizens involved in the monitoring. And most of all, we have to practice adaptive forest conservation. Thank you.
I'm sure there's a number of issues we'll come back to that. Jamey Fidel from VNRC, who runs the Vermont Forest Roundtable.
Thanks. Well, thanks, George, and the Folk Life Center for putting this on. It's a great opportunity to have a discussion like this and celebrate these photographs and the working forest. So there's already been this theme to a certain degree, but I just want to start with the premise that I think we will all agree that forests define the state. I mean, we are the Green Mountain State, and it's the Green Mountains and it's the forests that are really the backdrop, the character, the vitality of so much of what we enjoy and what we utilize here in the state. I want to start with just a list of some of the values, which you all know, but just put some of it in perspective of what our forests provide. From an economic perspective, forest-based manufacturing, recreation, tourism employ approximately 13,000 Vermonters and bring in about $1.5 billion to the state every year. Our forests provide recreation opportunities, and so many of us celebrate the forest in so many different recreational ways. I won't go through the list. Ecological values. We know that our forests are providing wildlife habitat, maintaining water quality, storing water, flood retention. A big issue now as we look at a changing climate. Intact forests are a big part of the puzzle of how we're going to maintain water quality in the state. And forests are estimated to remove more than 75,000 metric tons of carbon. That's about as much carbon as emitted by 14,000 light cars and trucks in Vermont. So we have to recognize the role that forests play in storing and sequestering carbon. In energy, we have heating and electricity generation from wood products from our forests. And Vermont is a leader on heating schools and buildings with wood heat. So for the past decade, we've convened the Forest Roundtable. It's been an opportunity for quarterly meetings among diverse interests. And the real goal was to bring members from the forest products industry, conservation organizations, woodland owners, foresters, planners, state and federal agencies, people that are involved in state government, to bring everybody together and say, let's talk about the future of our forest, and let's do it together. And let's not have potentially fractured discussions like took place on the management of the Green Mountain National Forest, but let's look at our forested state and decide what the future is going to look like and what do we need to do to focus on keeping our forests intact. And we came out as a group with 4 areas to focus on. And we knew we needed to focus on tax policy and things like the current use program, which really does keep our state, our forest intact more than any other program in the state. That's not to mention the other successful programs like the land trusts that are helping to conserve forests. But current use is the biggest player. Valuing ecosystem services, like putting a value on actually the water quality attributes that forests provide. Looking at how we do plan our communities from a land use planning perspective and dealing with the urbanization and the different patterns that different growth would have on our ability to retain forests. And then finally, focusing on maintaining a viable forest products industry. And in order to do that, we held some specific meetings on the industry, and we brought in experts, people like Mike and others who were mill owners, people who we heard from loggers, and we heard from wood manufacturing experts. And so we took a tally of the challenges and the opportunities that we heard from these people. And I'll say that the list of challenges was a lot greater than the opportunities, but I think there are a lot of opportunities, and I'll hit on that in a minute. But I just want to quickly tick off some of the challenges, and I know many of you in the room will identify with these. Our forest products industry competes in a global market. We heard that there's competition from composites from New Zealand to pine from South America, and the list goes on. Labor, there's an aging workforce. High turnover rates, difficulty finding entry-level labor. High workers' compensation rates, high energy costs, high health care costs, closing of lumber mills in the state, transportation challenges, low financial return for harvesting low-grade wood, weather, inconsistent weather in the winter, for example, lack of availability of certified wood, high equipment cost and lack of access to credit, regulatory costs, public perception of logging, urbanization issues, as Tom was mentioning, forest pathogens, and forest fragmentation, which is a supply issue, and the conversion of our forests to development. So there's a long list, and I'm sure I missed a bunch, but that's a challenging list to deal with. But with these challenges, I would say come opportunities, and I'll give you one example. So we identified transportation as being a barrier. Our interstate system, at the time that we had this one particular meeting, did not allow for the transport of certain weights of logging trucks while adjoining states did. And this was a challenge and an issue. And we had members from the congressional delegation there. And they went back and worked with Senator Leahy and actually changed the interstate weight limit. And now logging trucks can more easily travel on the interstates versus the back roads of Vermont, which was an increasing challenge. So I'd just like to say that there was a challenge, but an opportunity that was addressed, and it happened from people coming together and talking about it and agreeing that this was an issue about the vitality of our working landscape. Let's get something done on the policy front. We've been spending a lot of time looking at the issue of forest fragmentation, and I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have in the state right now. It's simply that we are losing the base of forest for the first time in a century. We've had this incredible success story over 100 years of our forest regrowing from very heavy clearing. And for the first time in a century, after a huge success story of regrowth, we're actually starting to see our forests decline. And that's something which we have to take stock of. So what's happening? We've got increasing number of forest land owners, an increasing number of forest parcels, larger parcels shrinking into smaller parcels, more landowners who may not be open to supporting a working landscape. The numbers we verified, the number of parcels increased from 62,000 in 1983 to 88,000 in 2008. Developed land increased from 180,000 acres in 1982 to 302,000 in 2010. That's a 67% increase over 3 decades. During a study period which we looked at from 2003 to 2009, 126,000 acres of undeveloped forest gained housing and infrastructure. The value of land almost doubled over a 7-year period, putting more pressure on forest landowners to look to development versus maintaining a working landscape. And in just a 7-year period, we quantified in 22 case study towns that there were 2,750 lots created from 925 subdivisions. So we know growth is going to happen in the state. And there's positive attributes of that growth and challenges that come with the growth, especially as we increase the number of forest land owners and we lose our intact forested areas to more and more kind of fractured ownership and development. So I'd like to say that with this is an opportunity, because what we found through our research is still that 70% of the state is represented in parcels 50 acres or larger. So there's the opportunity. The state is not lost. We just see this pressure that's now coming from the urbanization that was mentioned, from the growth that's going to happen. But how do we manage that growth in a way that's going to keep our working landscape intact? Commissioner Snyder's been leading an effort on this issue, and I'm hoping that we'll hear a little bit more about it. I just wanted to quickly mention a couple other opportunities that I see, and then I'll turn it over to Commissioner Snyder. There is really an emphasis right now on looking at our working forest for wood heating. There's a comprehensive energy plan that's come out, a draft, that's talking about doubling the amount of utilization of wood for heating. There is an opportunity for utilization of low-grade wood, and there's a potential opportunity that will help support the working landscape. Marketing, if we can create a greater demand for Vermont wood products, much like we have now a celebration of Vermont's agricultural products and eating local products, we could do the same for working and utilizing Vermont local wood products. And I think many of us know that this is a no-brainer, but surely we have to be able to capitalize on that marketing opportunity. And I think, as Paul already said, I would just reiterate that polls consistently show that Vermonters throughout the state support working lands. And when you actually ask different questions about what they value, some polls show that the working lands appreciation is at the top of the list over anything else that a Vermonter would support. 97% in one poll of support of people polled said that they support Vermont's working landscape. So we know we have this underlying support from so many Vermonters. We need to capitalize on that and use that as a way to lead the connection of their support to keeping our rural lands and our working landscape intact.
Thanks, Jamey. So I'm getting to introduce the commissioner last. I have to say I've worked with this guy for 4 or 5 years, 4.5 years now. There's no harder advocate in the state of Vermont for the forest. State folks carry a lot on their shoulders, and they are in structures where they have a set of responsibilities and people they're responsible to, and this commissioner has been the most energetic, creative commissioner in my memory, and he's also bucked to do what he thinks is right and has been a real leader. So I really appreciate what you do, Michael, and it's great to, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for being here. It's really wonderful to see folks come out to be a part of something like this, because it really is wonderful. So thank you again, George, and Folk Life Center for convening. And when I listened to Paul's introduction, which was fantastic, Tom reflecting on his experience on the land, David and Jamey, I do think, well, in spite of Paul's very nice introduction, I'm not sure you need me. And because they've really set it up nicely here, right? And I'm very eager to take advantage of you. The sense that the fact that you're here and get to the dialogue part, because I think that's been envisioned. So I'm going to be really brief and say what I'm hearing here is good stuff, all of it. And it's amazing the power of experience that we have collectively, and it's really important to pull it together. What I hear are affirmations of what I think I know, and that. So to summarize, we Vermont is forest strong. And, that's 76% forested. One of the heaviest, most forested states in the country. But just like forests are not just a bunch of trees, our strength does not just come from the fact that we have a lot of trees. It's the multitude and variety of benefits that accrue to us, Vermonters and our guests, from forests. And it just like, forests are not just a collection of trees, and a wise person taught me a long time ago that really the word forest is beautiful and powerful, but it's more appropriately, it's more a verb than a noun. Because it's not a collection of trees or stuff, it's what it's doing. And that's this idea of these working forests, first of all. We know that long before there were sheep or cows or sawmills, this land worked. It provided all kinds of things, most notably things like air and water. Agriculture, our friends in agriculture are enjoying a renaissance, and we're really for that. That's a good thing, don't get me wrong. Might sound a little bitter, perhaps a little jealous, but that's a good thing. There's a lot of love for farmers right now, not so much the loggers. David reflected on this. We know that, and we do need to start to understand that and pay attention to it. It's providing, it's doing, right? This idea of the forest as verb, it's doing so much for us. That's the strength that we have. These guys have all touched on those values. Everything from water quality, water supply, flood protection, biodiversity, habitat, connectivity, even to things like human health and quality of life. And we haven't even mentioned the $1.5 billion of economic contribution from the folks who actually work in forest products. This scenic backdrop to this world-class tourism economy, the natural infrastructure for, again, a world-class outdoor recreation economy. Those are really important to Vermont, and it's all being given to us by the forest. But as David said, Paul said, it's not an accident, and it's not a wilderness. It's this working thing. It's working for us, has been, and then we have worked with it. David gave a brilliant outline of the history of our interactions as people, from the Abenakis to present with this land, and it has changed, and there's been many pulses, and we're now positioned. I guess I would summarize by saying what I'm hearing is we are now at a new place in our relationship with this land, and it's been interesting to reflect on what it was and where we are now and where we might be going. So we are heavily forested. It's providing much for us. There's a reason for it. Largely the people who have been working with this land. And I guess I would say, as I've traveled the state in the last year or two talking about this and taking input from folks, no one's challenged that. This idea that we are forest strong and we enjoy numerous benefits that accrue from the forest. And then I've asked, well, do you have any confidence that we have things in place, that it'll continue this way? That we have the legal, the economic, the cultural, the institutional frameworks in place to give you some confidence that the benefits that we've been enjoying from forests will continue? Nobody's said yes yet. And so in that way, I'm going to challenge Paul. I'm going to say, in a little bit, in a small way, it is an accident. We've just been benefiting from people working hard and well in the woods. And given the changing demographics, more people from away, not of the land, from the land, who don't necessarily, so our social license to work on the land is challenged right now, and increasingly so. We have an aging demographic of landowners, the increasing number of parcels, the smaller parcels that Jamey referenced, the vast majority of the private land in Vermont, so 76% forested, 85% privately owned. The vast majority of that is owned by people 65 years and older. I'm going to tell you that that's an alarming, that's a problem.
What good is it if you're not going to cut it?
Do we have a problem? What's the problem with this? We'll get to that for sure. I'm eager to get there.
25 acres ain't very big on the cover a lot of territory of what you got.
Indeed.
Ahead of the forested parks. Probably every one of you there sitting there was Al Gottlieb when the forestry started at Montpelier, at Waterbury Dam, at Ricker Mountain. So, and they still got a good standard now, but selective cutting is the best way to go. save your forest. Not to preserve it, because it will fall down, nature will fall it down.
And you'll find out, if you'll stay with me, you'll find out I'm with you on this. This is the point. It's worked for us. We've benefited from it. When we consider, are we prepared to keep these values going? Really, it kind of adds up to no, because we're starting to lose the sense of how it works. And what we have said is, quite frankly, that though it is significantly counterintuitive, we believe that our last best chance to save forests, and all they do for us, is by cutting some trees. Not the Wild West, not willy-nilly. It's got to be done closely and carefully and intelligently. I think we know how to do it. I think we can. We have to decide to do it. I think it includes some of David's ideas about maybe revisioning about how we approach that. And we are eager to do so. We've worked hard in the department in the last several years considering ways to adapt our silviculture, our approach to the woods in light of climate change. We have given a significant effort to understanding the supply chains and the value chains in the forest economy, to understand where do we need to make changes, how can we support it. And we've significantly recognized that this isn't going to get fixed by government, but we are interested in, as government, in playing some role along the way, wanting to keep those values coming. I think it's important to recognize that this private land, largely owned by an aging population, it's not because we have a problem with old people, it's because decisions get made towards the end of one's tenure on the land, and it's tending to split the land up, and it's tending to bring folks who maybe aren't of the working with the land sort of mentality. So it's important to pay attention to those things. And it's important, but most importantly, we're saying, we know a lot about silviculture. That's great. And as a forester, for me, it's my favorite thing, is to put paint on trees and to think about which trees. But it's not enough to know about silviculture. If we don't have a marketplace into which to sell those products, a viable, robust forest products economy, none of these benefits are going to continue. So we've noted this as our number one objective, is to find a way to actually support that economy. And that means supporting the folks who work in that economy and remove barriers that we can and provide incentives so that we can work with the woods carefully and closely and intelligently so that we can keep this thing going. We are seeing there are unsettling trends out there, and it's time to pay attention. Jamey referenced some of the ownership and the parcel patterns. There are some unsettling biological trends. Repeated forest inventories are showing, yes, for the first time in over 100 years, a net loss of forest land. Beyond that, increasing rates of tree mortality, decreasing of regeneration and increasing episodes of regeneration failure. Regeneration being the creation of new trees, making seedlings and saplings happen. A proliferation of invasive species, overbrowsing by deer and moose. These are all threatening regeneration in the future forest. We have invasive plants threatening regeneration of native plants, and we have a multitude of invasive insects and pathogens threatening forest health and productivity. Those are significant threats. We haven't even mentioned, really, the climate change piece there. The eroding social understanding and awareness and the license we have to work with forests. Those are some, and increasing pressures for folks to convert to non-forest. That's a lot of challenges stacking up right there. So we're at this tipping point. Last thing I'll say is I believe we've practiced forestry. These images reflect it for generations in a relatively low stakes environment, and a grading forest, growing, expanding, largely a culture of folks who understood the land and working with it. Neither of those things predominates today. We're at that tipping point. The sky is not falling. We are still forest strong. The point is not to stop every bit of growth and development. The point is, let's take time now to come together and say, how are we going to keep this thing going? There are threats, there are unsettling trends, and we are at this tipping point. Not an emergency. This is the time. As a forester, I'm very comfortable over 30 years thinking about what's going to happen out in the future. And that's what I'm trying to bring here is, let's be on this now so that we can keep this thing going. I'll pause there. and with my thanks, and hope that we'll get to back and forth and really want to address what's on your mind and hear your input. So thank you.
Well, what a great panel. Let's have a round of applause. I'm going to ask the panel not to give more speeches, but instead to speak, take a minute in relation to a question or a minute in relation to an observation. And I'm going to ask you all, the thing that I often see, I do a lot of moderating, and I hear people ask a question that is really not a question because they are answering the question when they say it. They really have something they want to say. So you don't have to ask these guys a question. If you have an observation, you have a story, you have something you want to share as part of this discussion, just do so. Don't worry about whether you're asking them or not. We're all experts in some way or another about this because we all care about it in different ways, okay? So I'd ask, is there someone who has either a question or an observation that you'd like to raise to start the conversation? And I'm just like the therapist. I'll stand here as long as it takes. Dave Potter.
I'll ask a legislative question for the commissioner because I never get to see him in my committee, or rarely. But anyway, you talked about the responsibility of managing state lands. And my question to you is, do you have enough people to actually do that?
No. How's that, Paul? Short enough?
That's about right. What can't you do because you don't have enough people?
This is, I appreciate the question, Representative Potter. And y'all should know Dave is he's the Transportation Committee, so that's why I don't get to see him in committee much, but he's a real stalwart supporter of forestry and a practicing woodlot owner, so appreciate his interest. And so the question, do you have enough resources, people, to manage state lands, the state forests, state parks, and wildlife management areas that we are entrusted to steward? Well, it depends on what we want from them. And so if the question is, do we have enough people right now to conduct, say, the timber sale projects, the forest management activities, and habitat improvement, recreation provisioning, and meet all the growing demands of the public for use of state lands, and administrating their increasing and diversifying range of activities on state lands that the public wants, that are all really good, then the answer it clearly is no. So there's a lot of good things to do. That said, we could just do less. And so that it's choices. And again, as a forester, that's what it's always about, is making choices. And so if we want to increase the rate of, say, timber sales that we put up for bid and contract to our many contractors around the state that work with us on state lands, then we need to focus on that, because we don't just go put paint on big trees. We have a process, and we inventory, and we map, and we pay attention to special places, and we protect water quality, and all the while meeting the other uses of that land. And so it just is. It's a responsibility we take seriously. So there's a lot of steps, and that takes time. It really is. I'm just trying to give you this sense of it, that there's some choices to be made. We feel like we could be more active in a lot of different ways. We'd like to be. We think there's benefits from that, and that would require growing our staff a little bit to meet those needs.
Okay. Other questions, observations, sir?
Continuing our forests for the future with the knowledge that more of the tree is being used for logging, but also for what used to be slash is now chipped for pellet product. We're not returning the biomass to the soil. Trees are wonderful, but without good soil, they're not going to have quality trees. Can we handle what the demand is on our forests?
Can everyone hear that? He's concerned that we're taking more of the wood out. We're chipping the ends and stuff. We're not leaving as much in the wood, so he's worried that we may be undermining soil health long term.
The quality of our soils.
Any one of you can take a quick shot, but again, keep remarks fairly short. How do you feel?
I think it's not as bad a problem as you may think. A lot of places that you don't have whole tree harvesting, they only take really the bole up to a certain point, because if you're providing wood fiber for the schools or Middlebury College, for instance, it's about bole wood. So you have to have a lot of fiber versus the bark. So the tops generally get left, except when the people are whole tree chipping, and that does take place. But you can do that, you just can't do it over and over and over again. So you lose some, because most of the nutrients are from the twig to the tip of where the leaves are. And so there is a nutrient loss at that point. But it's not as bad as people would lead you to believe, because it's a lot easier for people who don't like harvesting. It's a lot easier to scare people than it is to educate people. And what David said is very, very important. That one of the biggest things that we face is our being able to educate people about what actually happens in the forest. And it's very difficult to explain because it's extremely complicated. And it go back to that diamond. It has so many facets. And there's a string between that connects everything together. Everything that everybody has said is all connected. Every single piece of that, every single topic is connected to the other topic in some way. And so we've come through a long era in the last 30 years of preservation organizations scaring people to think that, they take a little clip and they show you that and people get concerned. And it's just a little clip. It's not really what's really happens.
Yeah. Let me ask these guys, are there studies that show soil health degradation, or are there concerns there?
Well, it's very site specific. In Addison County, you could probably cut trees till the cows come home, literally, on the east side, or on the west side of Route 7. Whereas if you get up into places like Goshen and Ripton and certain parts of Lincoln and certain parts of Starksboro, there's places where nutrients are an issue.
Uh-huh.
So it all depends.
Yeah.
Very site specific.
Okay, we may come back to this. Other questions or observations?
Well, when it was on the government, when I started, I was 18. In Chittenden, trees were like that.
Yeah.
Blazed and scaled in the tree.
Yeah.
Government marked on it how many feet was in it.
Uh-huh.
And you fellows, foresters nowadays, they don't go back in the woods. Check them out. That's half your trouble. And
Not
you can't
getting
put a good
in the
water
woods
bar
is more than half my
with a
trouble.
skidder. And I'm with I got a skidder. It should be near the arch road. It's like a herringbone. You pull them into it.
Yeah.
And you can fix the water. Even we used to put bridges in all the way up through this range.
Yeah.
Take them out. You don't know, I've been there. Downeyville, been up there, Campbell's home, tree signs around it, Cotton Brook, way to the end. Doesn't matter, I know that hill like you do your hands. And you're not doing your job enough to control the stuff. That's why maybe the government, they do clear cuts, which will take 100 years to put it back there. That's gonna ruin us.
Thanks.
You've been going longer than what I figured, because the private land is fading out.
Yeah.
And you gotta cut some of your state land in order to keep up with
It sounds like
and your government.
yeah. Sounds like Michael, you would like to do more cuts in state land.
Well, in fact, we have. We've increased the rate of cutting on state lands over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And it's just, but again, you don't just go chasing after the wood. And it's not all, it's not just capacity, but there's multiple things to do, and some of it's not ready. Others are plenty ready, you might say, and so it is, But so we have no policy that says, well, we got to slow down or not do it. We think there's more we can do. We're happy to do it. There's no other reason other than increasing competing needs.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Okay. Other observations or
Our folks, it should be say, our folks love to get out there and find those trees and put paint on trees and work with logging contractors and get this work done. They love it.
yeah, great. David.
Yeah, and so I just want to talk a little bit about this, the people coming into the state, number one. I actually, I guess I have a different view. I run into all these people that come into Vermont that just love it. And they have this little piece of Vermont, and they're not like about just like not doing anything. They're about doing things well. They're open to doing things carefully and well that advance what their objectives are, what their vision is for their land. And if you can figure out what that is, they're with you. That's one thing I'll say. And the other thing that gives me great hope is and I know a lot of people don't have tons of hope in the millennials, but I do. I think the millennials have an amazing ethic of being with the land. They're not big consumers. They love the local IPAs, that's for sure. And I think they're also gravitating towards local wood products and stuff. And the last thing I'll say is that Middlebury College as an institution has done an amazing job of cultivating ecological ethnicity across.
David is a tree hugger anyway.
Yeah, he's a tree hugger. Probably a lot of us are, one way or another. Let me just ask you,
Can't help
though.
it. I don't like looking pictures.
Let me ask you one thing about that. You know, when you think about what you've done with Vermont Family Forests, you've really worked with people who have, in some ways, parcelized. They've broken out into smaller holdings, but you've been able to work with them to work as teams to look at continuing to manage and continuing to cut, actually, on their land rather than just letting it go.
Exactly.
And that's a wonderful thing to build on, for sure. And and I'm glad they're coming and you're working with them. And as you say, if you meet them where they are, they're not opposed. And we've all learned this working with folks. I'm just getting emails from a different bunch of people, and I'll share them with you.
Okay.
Just
So
hit delete.
there's two sides to everything.
Paul, can I just follow up on
Sure.
that for a second? And to really get specific to what Peter is saying. And it's an unaccustomed role for me to defend the state. But if you just use the metaphor of what it used to be like to get on an airplane, where you just got your ticket, walked on and got on the airplane. What the state has to go through now to put up some timber is a lot like going on an airplane now. You end up taking out your shoes, your belt, your hat, your coat, emptying out your pockets. And they have to go through that kind of analysis and support every decision that they make because there's so many people looking for something that they're doing wrong. And it just comes down to a question when we get into the position where Tweeter is reflecting on, it's what have we done to ourselves? You know, we put them to such a hard task that it slows everything down, and that's part of the problem. And we've done that ourselves to ourselves. And it's an awful thing, but I don't know where the answer is there other than back to David with education.
On the other hand, sometimes when you're on the airplane, you're glad that everybody else has gone through that process.
That's certainly true.
Sir.
I'm curious what the panelists might say to this piece of data. In Pownell, Northeast Wood Products closed. In Bennington, Dewey Sawmill, Cushman's Furniture Plant closed. In Arlington, Hale Furniture closed. In West Arlington, Wilcox Sawmill, and just to take another example, in South Londonderry, the Boatwood Mill, Nelson W. Smith, Fulham.
In 10 years, we lost 40% of the mills in the state of Vermont. So Commissioner Snyder started talking about that list of challenges, but what are maybe more of the specific challenges that undermine the economic viability of mills in Vermont?
Well, I think what we would say, we are aware of those for starters, and looking at what's causing this, and it's what we've learned. I think is it's a complex of things. Workforce issues, labor is expensive, energy is expensive, wood is heavy and expensive to move around, fuel costs are prohibitive, workers' compensation. There's all these challenges that go against making a decent living, actually. Then you do that in a increasingly globalized marketplace. We don't have the size to compete. And in that way, so there's a massive adjustment going on, and there was a time when you needed a few timbers for a building project. You went to your local mill, and there was a mill near everybody. That doesn't exist, And I think we can sit and wonder why, and it's important to try to understand what went wrong and why that's happening. Some of these are out of our control, but at the same time, how do we, that's what we're trying to do, is rebuild this processing, primary and secondary manufacturing infrastructure and a viable supply chain that keeps it going. There was a big problem with logs going to the interstate. We have this game traveling when we drive to count loads going out of the state. And we're sending raw logs and buying them back as boards. As a landowner, that's fine for me because I still have a market to sell into, but it's not good for us collectively. Well, how are we going to handle that? We're up against it there. So we could go on and on painting that picture in southwest Vermont is playing out all over the state. And that's why we're looking at, so Jamey made reference to the comprehensive energy plan, this idea that, well, we have a heating need. We use a lot of heating fuel and propane. Well, we could do that with our wood, our local wood, and provide this low-grade market for heating spaces, and we want to advance that. And that has the advantage of providing a way, it's not just about providing the heat and keeping it local, keeping the money local. It has climate benefits, but it also allows us to have a more robust toolkit for growing the valuable timber that is made into value-added durable products, and so we can support that. We've identified a lot of the problems. What we need is to go at the solutions here.
Yeah. Let's let Tom share a little bit on this because he's in the business
And he's surviving so far.
I can give you a very primary example, and it's basically, as I said, it's supply and demand. And the best example of that is Bristol was primarily a sawmill town, a wood products town, had a furniture factory and 2 big sawmills. Lathrop's Mill was a modern, well-kept mill run by a family. For multiple generations, Lathrop's were in the wood business. Same thing with the Johnson Mill. Big mills, put out a lot of lumber, bought a lot of logs. When Lathrop's Mill went out of business, people would say to the Johnson Mill, well, you guys have got it made now, all the logs that went to Lathrop's are going to go over to Johnson's. You won't have any trouble buying any logs. Actually, what happened was the 10 million feet that Lathrop's Mill was using just kind of went poof. And it may be to Johnson's Mill, it made 300,000 or 400,000 feet more logs we got. But the other 8.5, 9 million feet just disappeared into the ozone. Now, where did that go? It went to Canada, it went to the other mills all around the state because there's a lack of supply. And what's going on in the forest products industry right now is consolidation, very large mills getting even larger. There used to be 2 very big forest products organizations in central New York, Bailey and Wagner, very big mills. Bailey bought Wagner. And so now that's one giant operation. And they keep expanding their timber shed. They're just knocking on the door all around us. And the mills are all over in central New York and the southern tier. It's just a total lack of supply all across New England. And that's what happens.
I'm sure we'll come back to some of these economic questions. Other observations or questions? Say it loud so people in back can hear.
I got a little bit of everything here. My family's been doing this since 1867, seen a lot of this stuff come and go, but what really you folks have brought up here tonight is fantastic. In other words, we're all working together, we're addressing our issues, but that's a local issue. Vermont is a local issue. You're forgetting we're living in a global economy. And back in 1993, when North American Free Trade Agreement was signed down in Washington, D.C., our logs started heading into Canada. And from that day, it's been going downhill slowly, slowly, slowly. And now, if that's not enough, we have the World Trade Organization, which enveloped China into the process, and now they're buying our logs. It costs about $200, because China ships us 4 times as much products as we ship them. They have thousands of empty containers sitting in their ports. Well, what do we do with them? We need lumber. They stuff them full of logs. For $280, they can get them back, full of logs. And this is a global thing, but what happens is the government, the federal government has got to step in and create a massive tariff on letting logs leave the state of Vermont or any of the New England states, because you people don't realize how many logs are leaving this country without being utilized here. When they're utilized here, there's lumber for people to buy, lumber for our factories. There is lumber for my shop. I have trouble buying lumber in Vermont because 95% of Vermont lumber leaves the state. It all gets shipped out of the state. And what your real problem is we have to keep those logs. We're growing enough logs. We have to keep those logs in Vermont. We can't see them go up to Canada every day, or now it's China. I was just on the phone today with Clark Lumber in Red Boiling Springs, Tennessee. And I said, thinking that they're in the heartland of the country, kind of in the middle, they wouldn't have any problems. I said, you guys getting plenty of logs down there? He says, Chinese are buying them up, left and right. I said, you're kidding me. He said, the Chinese are in buying our lumber. He says, they're premium logs, and they're shipping them for the staves. And I've known this for a long time. When I buy my black walnut out of Missouri from a mill, they're running up and down the Mississippi River, buying all the walnut logs and these other logs, and they're putting them on the barges, take them down to Orleans, put them in the containers, and off to China. And you people are clueless about the major scale of what's happening. Somebody's got to go to the top in Washington and get this changed.
Not just one, though.
Well,
There'll be a lot of
you know,
We got to do it unified. We can't let our products leave.
I'm sure a lot of people have observations around this topic. I'll start. I went to the other side of it, is I went to a factory in northern Vermont that manufactures high quality hardwood beds and all kinds of other stuff. They were pulling beds out of a box that were made in China. They were children's beds made out of a Russian maple, and they were cutting that Russian maple off the step with no environmental oversight whatsoever. And they were working with Chinese labor that was being paid about the same amount that a business like you guys are paying for workman's comp. And so they could buy those beds for the price of the wood in Vermont, all manufactured already. So people who are on the value-added side trying to make a living and be creative with value are also under the gun, and we've had a decline in manufacturers on that side.
We're trying to produce a beautiful hardwood floor in Bristol, and you got Canadians are all breathing down your back. You got bamboo and all of this other stuff that you're trying to compete with.
So it's a fundamental challenge, and you raise the issue of national policy.
It's national policy. It's got to start at the top. That's where the trouble started, and they have to address that.
Okay, well, thank you for raising that. If people have, other people out here or up front have an observation on that, I bet a couple of you do.
Well, I love hearing this from Tommy because he's a brilliant man. He has a business that's vertically integrated, like to die for, I think. So if we can't feed your business, we're really in deep shenanigans, is all I can say. And the notion of NAFTA, the free trade, it really should have been a fair trade.
Yes.
There's no free lunch, and the fact is, but NAFTA is that's it. That's it. So how do we as a people cultivate a sense of place where we can come together? And what I think it is not about competition, but what I think it is about mutually beneficial relationships. And I'm going to pick on you one more time, and that is that I know you created hardwood flooring out of the Heinsberg Town Forest that this guy marked, and had this fabulous story for white ash flooring in the Heinsberg Town, in that hall. Now that sort of stuff builds community. And that is a mutually beneficial relationship. You paid a good price. You had a great logger. They got good money. Everybody was made whole. Nobody got screwed. And that's what we have to be committed to. I think mutually beneficial relationships that work for the tree huggers, the hunters, the landowners, the loggers. This isn't pie in the sky stuff. This is the way it has been through millennia.
And it's the only way, actually, it's going to work.
Exactly.
So, I jump in and you say, what do we think about Tommy's points here? I'm with him. I think that is a massive, I said it's a global marketplace and we're exporting logs, it's a problem. So I'm with him on that. I'm also with him on trying to make some change there. I would say that's not going to do it. No. We need to do that, and we need to maybe not rely on a commodity lumber industry here, because we're not going to compete. But by having this scale, this sort of Vermont scale of infrastructure in this supply chain, so that David's vision can be realized here of these mutually beneficial relationships throughout at this scale. But it's going to take some of you being able to still sell at commodity levels. Just like in dairy, we've got a diversification in agriculture, but dairy is still a big hub. Similarly, I think we need these basic mill facilities as a hub, but we need to start to diversify the rest of how we market and process and sell forest products in this win-win-win arrangement.
Michael Rainville from Maple Landmark has a comment. You want to talk loudly, Michael, so I can hear you back there.
You know, I know about global competition. For sure. There's certainly a lot of plants in a lot of places that don't pay people very much to make wood products. But you know, a lot of the solutions, we do have to look at local solutions for things very often. And you know, we talk about, it's been mentioned, you know, people don't want to see the mud, they don't want to see, they don't want to see a logging head. It's not very attractive. You know, and we have to convince our own local population that what's going on is okay. The commissioner mentioned, you know, kind of looking at agriculture and, you know, with a little bit of jealousy, and certainly, you know, that there's a lot of headwind behind local food, and you know, it's a cultural thing, but it's also very easy for people to go to farmers market or even to, the local supermarket now and get food that, you know, they kind of know where it came from, and there's a local connection, and it makes people feel better about agriculture. Now the reality is that it's still a pretty small percentage of agriculture in Vermont that is part of that whole local thing. It's still a lot of commodity dairy, and in the wood products business, I mean, myself buying lumber, you know, a lot of the mills say, well, we're in a commodity business. And Vermont doesn't use enough wood to be worthwhile to a mill. And we have to be out on the markets with it and everything. But, you know, it doesn't take much. Like the project with the Heinsberg project that David just mentioned. You know, those kinds of things start to resonate with people. And people start to feel good about it. And they can ignore 80 or 90%. But if they can feel good about knowing where some connections are coming from, it's just like the local food. I think, you know, it greases the skids for the whole industry.
So I wonder whether, you know, when you talk about we're at a turning point, I wonder if we are actually seeing turning with more people understanding the forest side. The idea of the working landscape as being agriculture and forestry is out there everywhere. In public policy in Vermont, you can't talk about them totally separately.
Because I won't let them.
He won't let them. The House Ag Committee is now the House Ag and Forest Products Committee. There's now a state board that is the leading policy board for development, really working lands development, the Working Lands Enterprise Board. That group has got farm and forest people sitting side by side, and it's investing in farm and forest enterprises, and it's advising the whole government really in terms of where these industries can go and how the government can better serve rather than impede the industry. And the fact that Vermonters do get this connection, and a lot of people who are landowners, who are philanthropists, the Community Foundation right around the corner, they're identifying the 10 biggest things that Vermont philanthropists should invest in. And this year, one of the 10 is working on preventing parcelization and the breakup of forest because they see it as fundamental to the future. So people are really starting to think about this, and I think we're seeing a cultural change in more and more people understanding the economic foundations are essential. That's my observation, and I'd be glad if other people have a different opinion.
Well, I would say that, you know, we're hopefully turning the corner, and we need to do a lot of work on kind of the promotion and the marketing and getting the word out on these examples. I mean, I'll give a recent example. Is I worked with a local builder in the Mad River Valley on a construction project, and I asked him where he was sourcing the wood, and he has a relationship with Allen Lumber, and I asked him, where is the wood coming from? So I wanted to know, and he didn't know, and he said I could find out. I said, well, could we try and source the wood here in Vermont? And we, every step along the way, found local mills that were providing the same products. He thought it was going to be more expensive. It was only slightly more expensive for some of the products. And a light bulb just went off in his head along the way. And he said, I get it. And he said, this is what we need to do. He's building, homes and doing renovation projects all over, multiple towns. And he now understands that he can source most of the products that he was looking for locally. That's one relationship, but if we can start to multiply that across the landscape on the people who are making choices like that, I would like to think we can make much more of a difference.
Other folks out here have observations or
I have
questions?
a little story to tell.
Okay.
30 years ago, my older daughter was in Beeman Elementary School. And she came home from school and she said, Dad, do you cut trees? I said, yeah, that's what I do. She says, you can't do that, you're killing the forest. I said, well, where'd you hear this? She said, my teacher. She said that, it's a terrible thing to do to cut trees. So I went in and I had to educate her that this was not such a bad thing. And now it's 30 years ago. I would guess that maybe teachers don't try to say that now.
I don't think they do, because I think that there's a shift. I think that there's a big shift, and I'd love to hear observations from other people on this. But I think that the environmental movement is really different today than it was 30 years ago. That then it was like, we've got to stop pollution, we've got to stop DDT, we've got to stop one thing or another.
Too many.
And now it's all about, how do we produce an economy that's going to sustain the forest for the long term? How do we ensure that there's an economy that's going to protect the land and feed us and keep us healthy? In the face of the changing world scenario with population, with climate, with everything else we're going to face, the environmental movement is all about economic development in a way, economic development that works for the future. So I think that teachers are telling their kids I just heard about all these kids that are doing big recycling projects, and they're developing apps so that you can use your phone to scan whether this thing can go into the recycling bin or not. Kids are doing this stuff. So I think there's a real sea change there. I'd be glad of anyone else's observations. I've always got opinions.
One of the very best things that has happened to the forest and educationally is firewood. The oil prices going up, people started burning firewood again, and they would call up to find out if they could have any firewood, and they would get a promise, and then they wouldn't get a delivery, and they'd say, well, where's the wood? And their supplier would say, well, there isn't any. I can't get any logs. I can't get any wood to supply. And they'd look out and they'd see the whole mountainside covered with trees and wonder why they can't get any wood. And it goes right back to the supply and demand, because the price goes up, the wood comes out. But people began to value the fact that they could get, the firewood is there, they just can't get it. And that they could have their firewood, they go in and they see firewood laying around, and they know it's there, they know it can be had, they just don't understand the process. And so when people start telling them that bad things happen in the forest, they're like, well, maybe so, but I want my firewood anyway. And that's been, you can watch the attitude change with each oil cycle that we went through. In the middle of the 70s with the first oil boycott, firewood was very popular, and it went up, and then oil came back, and people said, well, geez, firewood's a lot of work. So then they went back, they tried coal, and then eventually they went back to oil and propane. And then it came around again, and it's about a 10 or 15 year cycle that people go and they find out the old rural values of making firewood and heating their homes, and they get disgusted with it because it's a hell of a lot of work. And they go back to taking the easier route. Now we're seeing that happen probably this coming summer. Their firewood won't be in such demand because oil's so cheap. But as soon as oil starts to go up, firewood, and that makes people in contact with rural values in the forest. Where's my wood? And that's been very, very helpful.
I find it interesting to hear the conversation about how hard it is to get product in a state that's still, over 75% forested. It is kind of an interesting conundrum. And so pondering that a little bit is, and if one was to embrace mutually beneficial relationships, hey, this works for me, it works for you, win-win, then the dialogue has to be a two-way. It has to be two. We have to hear what people are saying, and we have to not just throw them off as being idiots because they are having a position that's contrary to what we've always done. And so I really do believe that we have the capacity, rather than having recreation and timber harvesting kind of like going after each other, of actually cultivating an economy where it's a mutually beneficial relationship between recreation, which is now 55% of the forest-based economy, and value-adding of forests. And part of that, I think, is ramping up the technology so that it's appropriate for our diminished-sized woodlots. I mean, people have these little postage stamp woodlots that can better be operated with smaller, lighter, Scandinavian-type equipment, and it's like it just works. And I actually really believe in forwarding because it just makes it. There's no muss, no fuss. You can get in, you can utilize the woods. You don't compromise the recreational values. Your fuel consumption is less. You can sort better. It's just like a really good thing. So I would submit that a place for the working forest enterprise, whatever, I'm terrible. Once you hit 63, your memory goes to hell. But is to focus, I think, this is it. This is the interface between the public and the woods is the logging community. And I think really, really trying to get us ramped up a little bit in terms of having friendlier harvesting equipment, I think could help go a long way in bridging the gap.
Jamey, I want to hear from people who haven't had a chance to speak.
Yeah, I would like to second that. I mean, we're in the middle of a select cut right now, and we only have about 400 acres. And we put out 26 proposals for bids. We only got 2 loggers interested because we're a select cut. We're not particularly interested in making any money off of this cut, but we want a better forest in 20 or 30 years. And it was hard, and you know, we had to compromise somewhat, and we had to offer a little bit more than we might want to cut, and so the process, you know, we're in the UVA, and so the process is not really designed for, in my opinion, from what I've experienced, which is very limited, for creating select cuts. It's more designed for creating some kind of economy so the logger can make some money, which is totally understandable, and feed the mills, and the bigger mills need to get fed, so you have to cut more logs more quickly. And that really is counter to the issue that David's talking about, which is if we have this fear of fragmentation, and if we have all of these smaller lots with owners that are feared of overcutting, we need to design a system that is going to be more forest friendly, still be able to get out the logs. They may cost more, but then the Chinese won't buy them. If they cost too much and we'll keep them here in the state, the Canadians might buy them. But
yeah,
you know, and so that issue has come up with us.
Jamey wanted to share a remark, but then we've got other folks waiting.
Well, just say quickly, I mean, the comment was brought up, you know, this perception that cutting the forest is harmful, and you know, working for an environmental group, I think right now that there's a lot of focus on acknowledging that the working landscape is vitally important to Vermont, and there's a lot of focus on how do we do it well, how do we maintain forest health, how do we have a necessary conversation. The issue was brought up before, you know, can you take too much out of the forest, and can that have an impact on forest productivity? And looking and coming up with creative guidelines and advice to landowners. And Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation just led an effort to have voluntary harvesting standards. What does good practice look like on the ground? There has been a lot of discussion about coming out with guidelines of how much forest or how much of a tree you do want to leave behind, how much of tops and limbs should be left behind so that we actually have productive forest. So I would like to think that we have moved away as a state and even as a broader society from the stigma that cutting forests is bad, and I think it's more important that it's a necessary conversation how do we do it and how do we do it well?
Yeah, and I think we have to look at VNRC as a really progressive model in terms of thinking about that, Jamey. So, good on your part. You've been waiting to speak.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, so David was talking about the interface between the general community and logging jobs, foresters, forestry practice. That gentleman back there was talking about how, you said it was in the 70s where you talked to an elementary schooler who was...
80s.
80s, okay, so I was in middle school in the, 15 years ago now, and myself and my classmates were shown Fern Gully, and we were scared to hell of logging because, I don't know if any of you have seen that, it's about logging in the rainforest, and we were never told that no focus was ever put on farming, so we're going back to this issue of local agriculture being valued right now versus local forestry. And I'm not sure how it is nowadays in elementary schools and middle schools, but we were never told that cow shit produces methane that goes into the water, so we were never scared of farming. We were scared of logging, sure, because they show these big, awful machines eating up trees at a rapid pace. So I guess it does go back to environmentally friendly, more environmentally friendly logging technology than simply skidding or maybe even something fast forwarding. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? It's just a jumble of thoughts there.
Oh, they're all good ones. Thank you. Other observations? The people back there don't get as much of a chance. You and then the fellow behind you next. Oh, go ahead.
I was just thinking, talking about public acceptance of logging. The county forester in Montana, out of Missoula, Peter Cole, I don't know if he's still a county forester, and he studied in Germany years ago. He went back on a Fulbright. He was comparing Montana and Germany with Montana has a population of maybe 1 million, I don't know, very small population inside of the state. The same land base, the same timber base as Germany, which has 80 million people. And the Germans have always been so accepting of logging, and they using the woods for recreation. It's logging everywhere. They cut, in comparison to Montana cuts barely 1 billion board feet, and Germany, I don't know if this is right, either 20 or 30 billion board feet on the same land base. And I thought being in Montana, the Missoula area, it's very, the environmental groups, education is all not in favor of cutting timber, and mills are shut down. There are limited markets in a lot of places, but the Germans must have something right to have the public accepting wide use of forest for timber forestry.
40 or 50 generations of cuts.
Yeah.
Who knows? Sir?
Yeah, I guess I gotta be a voice in the wilderness and say fragmentation isn't bad for me.
Stand up and
what?
Stand up and
okay.
Let us have
Brynn
it.
mentioned the forwarder. Thank you, David. I'm operator forwarder. One of the most profitable jobs I ever had was a 3-acre house lot. Okay, nobody else would think about doing that. 50,000 feet of pine. I was impressed. I kind of look at doing something nobody else wants to do. I mean, Tom Yager, I don't know that much about your business, but you've sort of done that. You're doing the flooring industry thing. You started that. Not exactly a lot of competition in Vermont for that, is there?
Well, there was before 1950 in the advent of tile and carpet. There was a lot of hardwood floors made in Vermont, but those other competition factors came in, and carpet felt pretty good on your feet in the cold winters here, so that's what converted away from the hardwood flooring.
It looks like it now is for the money.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a landscape.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No,
I
that ain't right.
I observed that fragmentation, it doesn't benefit some people, it does benefit other people. In other words, it kind of, things only get so much, it's so fragmented before it goes the other way. There used to be a lot of 10 and 20 and 30 acre farms in Vermont, which there aren't anymore. And well, the place I'm on, the farm I bought, that was originally 2 farms, which got brought into one. So that, on South Munger Street, there was deep fragmentation. So I mean, I hear panelists here, and it seems like everybody's saying the sky's falling. And I'm always skeptical of people that say the sky's falling. You know, I suspect these same arguments are going to be discussed in 30 years from now.
I hope so. Thank you so much. Other perspectives or questions that folks have?
I think the best thing you do is keep your landscape looking a little bit better. Would save the pole trees and save them out in the wood.
Yep.
And a good tree will still produce, but all that junk's gone.
All right, clear it out and you get those pole trees to grow into the
Leave the
next
pole
generation.
trees in 25 years is a lot better than 100.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
And if you want to go through Rochester, go over the route on 53, that plantation there of pine is mine that I've cut in there. It ain't mine, I done it.
Yeah.
The guy wanted a good job, and there's a guy right there said, "What do you think I brought this fellow with me for?"
Yeah.
You can't tell, I've been in there.
Great.
Took 150,000 out of that for himself. It should be tweeter's law.
Okay.
But I don't want to, all of them are saved.
All right.
Because that is my living.
Okay, so other folks have perspectives or stories that you'd like to share? Or questions? Yes,
I
sir.
got one observation, the fellow with the 400 acres. Maybe you were asking too much for your timber if you only got 2 people. I mean, there's always a certain point where I can offer money, you can't offer more if you're going to lose it all.
We weren't asking anything, as I understand it, my forester handled the bidding process, and you know what was arranged in the end was, and the 2 bids that we did get were very close. Okay, and nobody else wanted to bid, but what we ended up doing was selling it on on the board foot.
Yeah, so much $1,000.
So much $1,000, yeah. Which to me, coming from a cabinet business, I would have thought you'd do it on what's another issue, but on the dollar amount that was, you know, tallied.
Yeah, we shouldn't renegotiate the deal now.
No.
Let me just say.
But the interesting thing about it is the logger, who's the crux of this whole event, because without the logger, nothing happens, and without educated loggers and loggers that are willing to go into these smaller lots and work with all this fragmented environment, we're going to get nowhere. So, you know, we need to invent machinery that will pull logs out and keep everybody happy and keep the price up.
Yeah. Let me ask if there's anyone who hasn't spoken that's got a last word to say, and if you guys have a last word, you'll get a shot. But really briefly, I think we've had a really fascinating conversation, but we should be winding up. Anyone out there that hasn't spoken that wants to share a reflection?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
One comment. I was at a deer camp the first weekend way up in the Northeast Kingdom, and these guys have been there for a long time. And it was interesting how they were bemoaning the fact that there were so few deer, and this is a large area they've been hunting for over 40 years. And what's been happening is parcels around them, sizable parcels, have been cut off repeatedly. And, you know, their perspective is that of deer hunters. And so they're looking at trying to create a habitat as well as understanding. One of the hunters is in fact a logger, so he's very much into this game and understands the economics of it as well, but he's also part of this family unit. So it was interesting, and I would go back to a comment I heard earlier on, is that, you know, if our forest parcels are shrinking, maybe what we need to do is to try to work with landowners that abut and look at the forest through a larger or collective group of not individual landowners, but let's try to think of the county foresters start to look at, okay, this person owns this, and he has a standard white pine, and I think David's been doing that a little bit with Vermont Family Forests, and we put that together with this person, and would it make sense for the logger economically to come in and maybe do a harvest here and there, and we look at it
more
mutually,
mutually.
and we also look at that helps the logger, It may help the hunters. It's going to help potentially the landowners because they can put this together on a larger scale and improve costs. So
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Is there other last thoughts? Briefly, yes, ma'am.
I was going to say we could do some more with education of young people, young kids. There's been a shift, but there's still some subtle worrying about trees. You know, you're reading about so-and-so child won the contest for Hannaford's to design the reusable shopping bag.
Yeah.
And this is all very nice, but then the children will make a statement that if so many people purchase and use these shopping bags, X number of trees will be saved. So you see the message there that trees need to be saved. And so if we could continue with the contest and but leave out the message that trees need saving.
Right.
I think that would be
Like they're an endangered species. Okay, so last thoughts, guys. Briefly, you don't have to have one, but if you've got something you want to add in to close.
I'd love to just mention something that happened in Starksboro Town Forest, and Louis DuPont is here. He did the value adding, and we had a little, and it was with kids that went into the town forest, and they all had a tree. They measured the diameter, and they figured out the species, and they did all sorts of bark pressing and stuff. And I thought none of them were going to want to give up their tree for the shelves for the town, the little local school. They all wanted to give up their tree for the school. So it's really. It's about connection. It's about trust. It's about a lot of stuff. But I think I think we can. If we can't pull it off in Vermont, it can't be done. That's what I think.
Anything else?
Picking up on this point, I think, right, we don't, and I would come back to, I think I made a point of saying the sky is not falling, and we want to save forests, though, not trees. And we're going to save forests by cutting some trees, and by working with forests carefully and closely in this collaborative win-win way. So that is the goal. And what I would say to your point, Paul, about sensing these various changes, I could add to the list of things that we've seen in the last 5 years that are signal good things. And I would summarize it this way, that there's more light and less heat, I believe, and more understanding of the importance of forests and the role that forestry plays in protecting and keeping forests. So that's why I say we've at this tipping point, sure, but it's also this opportunity point, which is, and that's why I'm just so appreciative that this is happening, because this is what needs to happen. So Tom said, coming together, and we're going to stop looking backwards. We need to be looking forward together. And that's what I'm sensing is happening. Again, I'm sensing way more light and way less heat, and that is a good thing for forests.
Thank you. And isn't it interesting that we're here in sort of like an artistic photo thing of the forest? Kathleen Cole, who's a beautiful Vermont artist, is doing an art show on loggers, on cuts, on logs and piles.
It'll be coming here, right?
Yeah, in January. It's fabulous, so you should see it. The Land Trust has just done an art set of commissions on lands that are being forested and on farming together. And I think we got to hand it to George. You deserve a round of applause. And the last thank you I would make is to each of you. Like, you could be watching TV. Why are you here? What is it that we all have with our differences that we stand for together here? And it's this love of the land, and it's the love of the forest and what it does for the long-term future of Vermont. It's essential to us. I don't think it's going to go away. I think we're going to have tough conversations about it because we care about it, and we have to fight for its long-term future.
We don't want to go too long.
Yeah, and we don't want to go too long. So thank you very much, and let's go.